Welcome to CivilNet. Our guest today again on CivilNet is Chris Bohjalian, a best-selling author from the United States whose not quite most recent book, but the book before last, Sandcastle Girls, is about memories of genocide, impact of genocide, consequences of genocide, and genocide as well. Chris, welcome to CivilNet again. Was that a fair, quick summary?
Salpi, that was lovely, and it's wonderful to be back on CivilNet. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We wanted to talk to you now, Chris, because you've just been to Western Armenia, Western Armenian cities, you, Hachik Muradian, Eric Ghazarian, and you were there, I suspect, to scout out territory for the film version of the Sandcastle Girls. Is that right?
That's correct. I don't know whether Eric will ever be able to film in Turkey, but it was important to see Bitlis, to see what's left of Harpert, to travel through Van to Akçamar, to see Diyarbakir, to see what he needs to recreate, what these venues actually look like now. Because, as you put it so eloquently, so much of the Sandcastle Girls is about genocide's legacy, the ruination of our ancestral heritage.
And, you know, this is a constant question in our minds here at CivilNet as we try to give platforms to some of these wonderful projects. Is it better to give you platform and let's talk about, hey, making a film version of Sandcastle Girls, or is it better to just keep quiet and let you guys do it?
I think it's important to just do the work. I think that's true whether you're making a movie or whether you're writing a novel. It's important to just hunker down and power through the material. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really have enjoyed working with Eric Ghazarian on this project. He's not merely an immensely gifted screenwriter and director. He is one of the hardest working people I know. So, for example, when we were traveling through Van, when we were traveling through Bitlis, when you're with somebody like Eric, when you're with somebody like Hachik Muradian, you do a lot of work, you cover a lot of ground, emotionally and geographically.
Tell us about the covering a lot of ground emotionally. We've been reading recently about intentional efforts to remove whatever vestiges of Armenian presence are left in Mush, which already is pretty devoid of an Armenian legacy. And you know, I'm sure you saw that throughout your trip, both intentional and unintentional consequences of de-Armenianization. Talk about the emotional journey.
Precisely, that's so well put. One of the great gifts of this journey for me into historic Armenia is that I was traveling with my great friend Hachik Muradian. And Hachik knows this world well.
And Hachik is the editor of the Armenian Weekly.
Yes, Hachik is the editor of the Armenian Weekly here in the United States, and prior to that at Astag in Beirut. And he'd been to these places, many of them, before. In fact, he'd been to some recently. So when we were visiting one particular monastery up the hill from Van, he discovered that in the year since he'd been there last, there had been more looting. There had been people digging up around the church, once again searching for gold, for artifacts, for relics. Then when we were in Changush, he was standing looking at the ruins of a church, and he realized that it was different from when he'd been there last year.
Where is Changush?
Changush is perhaps 80 kilometers northwest of Diyarbakir. It is between Diyarbakir and Elazig. In any case, he took a photograph of the ruins of the church, and he realized that in the interval of 1 year, an entire wall had been allowed to collapse. One of the other villages we went to, Yazibashi, it used to be an Armenian village. And one of the pilgrims with me on this journey, George Ajayan, his great-grandfather was baptized in the Armenian Church there. And all that remains of that church is the altar. But the altar still, the arch above the altar, excuse me, but the arch above the altar still stands. And one of the things that Hachig and George made really clear to the Kurdish family who now live there is that they and we are grateful that they have preserved that arch above the altar, that it still stands a legacy to our cultural heritage in this Kurdish village. It was profoundly moving to see that arch still standing. It's profoundly moving to walk through the ruinations of all of these churches, of all of these monasteries. And at the same time, it's sometimes equally as dispiriting to see the feeble, small-minded, and historically inauthentic attempts to rebuild an Armenian church. We saw one church, and I use that term loosely, put it in quotes, for example, not far from Van, that has been, quote unquote, rebuilt.
By whom?
By EU money, European Union money, not calling it a church now, but calling it a quote unquote museum.
Are we talking about Acht?
No, not Akhtamaru. No. This is a much smaller church. It's probably 30 kilometers from Akhtamaru, just on the edge of the city of Van itself. And it looks nothing like an Armenian church. It looks like a bomb shelter. Imagine that you just put a bunch of bricks into a square and said, oh, this was once an Armenian church.
Well, Eric Ghazarian will be in Yerevan soon. We'll be sure to invite him, and I'm sure he'll have some pictures. That's news to me, and this is a very interesting story, because it's one thing when, you know, cultural anthropologists study uses of old khachkars and old church stones in homes and other buildings, you know, by Kurds and Turks in Armenian areas. That's a different sort of use and evolution. But what you're saying is just wrong.
It's just wrong. Can I tell you another astonishing story of a quote-unquote relic? We went to see some khachkars in a Kurdish village on the way to Diyarbakir, between Van and Diyarbakir. And as we were driving there, we made this detour to see these very, very large 8 and 9 foot tall khachkars. And the khachkars are still there. They are buttressing up a barn, but they're still there, and it was lovely to see them. As we were leaving the village, a Kurdish elder stopped our van and said that he had a very, very valuable Armenian relic, but he could not read the Armenian writing on the bottom, the mysterious Armenian writing on the bottom, and could someone in our van translate the Armenian for him so he could understand what this relic was. So Hachig, of course, said he'd be happy to look at it, and we were all very interested to see this relic. The elder returned with a plate, and on the bottom of the plate, not in Armenian, but in English, was the following: Royal Tutorware, Staffordshire, England. I Googled the plate and found it on eBay. It is from the 1960s, and it is worth about $11. But this Kurdish community thought this plate was an Armenian relic and had value of some sort.
There's so much history to understand and write and rewrite and fix, and so much, huh? This is fascinating. This is a whole new twist that I'd never heard before.
Can I tell you another story of our journey?
Sure.
When we were driving on to Elazig and we went to Changush, we went to Changush for two reasons. We wanted to see the church, which was of course extraordinary, because Changush, prior to 1915, had over 10,000 Armenians living there. So this church is just was gorgeous. It was magnificent. And of course, we wanted to see Dudan, the crevasse, where in the summer of 1915, virtually all of those 10,000 Armenians were shot, bayoneted, or hatcheted, and their bodies thrown 250 feet to 300 feet into the crevasse below. And of course, this is unmarked. When you are going to visit these places, there aren't signs. There's no memorial. There's no marker that says 10,000 people here were annihilated. There's just nothing. It's just a hole in the ground. So we went to pay our respects there. We went to pay our respects to the church. And as we were leaving the village of Changush, a gentleman in his 60s pounded on the door of the van. Once again, everyone knew that these Armenian Americans were in the Kurdish village, because whenever we would visit one of these villages, the children would follow us, and we were like the Pied Piper. So the villagers knew we were in town, and the 60 or 65-year-old man knocked on the door of the van and said we had to meet his mother-in-law. She was 98 years old. And all of us, of course, immediately did the math. It's 2013, 98 years ago was 1915. So our Kurdish driver, with this fellow in the van with us, drove us to his mother-in-law. His mother-in-law is a hidden Armenian. She was an infant in 1915. Her mother was at the Dudon crevasse, among the lines, about to be slaughtered, when a Turkish soldier thought she was pretty, pulled her from the line, and married her. And this is her daughter. And when Hachig was interviewing her, and we were talking to her and asking questions, for most of the interview, we were all emotionally wrought. I was thinking to myself, this is just extraordinary. We are meeting the last Armenian in Changush, the last link to the slaughter at the crevasse. And I was thinking that this son-in-law wanted us to meet her. But when, toward the end of Hachig's interview, I was sitting on her left, I took her hand, I understood that it was the reverse. This was a good man, and he wanted his mother-in-law to meet us. He wanted his Armenian mother to meet some Armenians before she died.
I don't know whether the stories about these meetings with these hidden Armenians, these last Armenians, is more moving, or what you said about the gorge, the French have a term, the lieu de mémoire, the places of memory, and they're usually used for places of not good memory. And it seems to me that our generation, for the first time, is having the opportunity to really see the places, the locales that determined in many ways our history. So I want to thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I don't think I'm alone if I say I look forward to reading them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you will. I've been writing about this journey, and I will continue to write about this journey.
Thank you. And we will, of course, continue to follow both your work as well as the path of the Sandcastle girls, and continue to talk about them here on Civilnet. Thank you, Chris Bohjalian.
Thank you, Salpi. Shinoda Galu.
And thank you for following us on Civilnet.